In Hollywood, it seems like everyone wants to be an example. They want to be talked about, revered. They want to earn their title as the masterclass in fill in the blank. Well, today I present to you the masterclass in appropriation. Amongst the biggest poisons in the modern arts is the cinema oligarchy. Give any rich boy a camera and he's suddenly an artiste. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that Jacques Audiard, the director of this abhorrence, is a nepo baby. Born to a director father, it seems like he had his career literally handed to him. And it kind of shows. I know that there's going to be cinephiles that stumble across this video inevitably and they might feel inclined to comment on his endless list of awards. First of all, my battle is not with you. Secondly, as a member of the Society of Composers and Lyricists, I can just say that everyone votes for their friends. A small portion of you, I expect, might have watched my video on culture and taste in the context of music. Remember musical and extra musical factors? How music microculture cannot be authentically represented using any single musical factor like melody or harmony. Representation or borrowing requires a deep understanding of both the musical and extra musical factors like geography and socioeconomics. A holistic approach that takes as much context into consideration to avoid appropriation. Remember that? Well, what if someone managed to appropriate not just culture, but cinema, music, and identity in one swing of an axe? Talk about three birds with one stone. Let's start with the obvious. Emilia Pérez is one of the most misguided, clueless attempts at representing Mexican culture that I've ever seen. And not even in the usual Hollywood kind of way, where you slap a mariachi band somewhere in the background and you call it a day. This is a far more poetic miss. This flop starts from the very top. Jacques, the director, has admitted to never stepped a foot in Mexico. He's never taken the time to immerse himself in the country, the people, the realities of this place. He's even admitted his disdain for both Mexico and the Spanish language.
L'espagnol est une langue de pays émergent, c'est une langue de pays modeste, de pauvres, de migrants.
And yet somehow he felt qualified enough to tell a Mexican story. My problem with all this isn't even inherently political. It's more about like, how can he call himself an artist? Did he not get the memo, how to be an artist 101? Do your research. But putting personal conflicts aside, there is a pragmatic reason to avoid appropriation. Well, it's definitely true that borrowing from cultures in a misguided, uninformed fashion is morally questionable. For the sake of respecting the focus of this channel, I am more concerned with how art feels when it's devoid of these guided subtleties. Do you ever go back and watch a movie from the early 2000s that has CGI characters that look like shit? Maybe the digital character lacks a shadow or his skin does not have subsurface scattering, and you don't even need to know what that is to get the feeling that something's off. Our subconscious works overtime to make sense out of things, and when it lacks all the details, it fires that uncanny valley alert. In my experience, something very similar happens with stories. If they lack this framework for believability, we never become immersed in them. Compare EP for a moment with Coco, another Hollywood film, but one that actually took the time to understand the culture that it was representing. The Magic Town architecture, the family dynamics, the way death and remembrance are honored in Mexico. By the time the film gets to the supernatural elements, we are already so immersed that we find them believable. And EP kind of starts with the right idea in its first few minutes by touching on the human rights violations, only to break into song. And I guess it could be done if done tactfully, but the music. If you're doing a musical, the bare minimum is that the music needs to work. And somehow EP fails at even that. The lyrics are terrible. They are uninspired, forgettable. It's a level of unintentional buffoonery rivaled only by Tommy Wiseau's The Room.
Oh, hi, Mark.
I can't even say that at any point during the movie I heard some legitimate singing. The best we got was some cheap take on German expressionist Sprechstimme. There's no musicality, no proper phrasing, and very, very weak form structure. And when it comes to the film as a whole, I was too busy cringing to care about any of the characters. There was never a sense of drama, only minute counting as we got into the second act, which by the way, lasted forever. And by the time we got to the third act, it felt like 15 minutes. The movie never manages to set a pace, a flow. It felt so rushed, so none of its emotional moments ever really land. And why don't they land, you might be asking? Well, because it treats cartel violence like a Hallmark redemption film. It literally almost feels like The Pacifier, only replace the tough dude trying to learn to be a nanny with a cartel boss changing genders to redeem herself. It's nuts. Did no one feel the gravity of this story? I mean, this has to have passed through like hundreds of eyeballs before getting greenlit, and it's like heartless. These subjects of violence and disappearances are real in my country. They are horrifying. The perpetrators get no happy endings, no redemption arcs. These tragedies are not entertainment. But that's the thing. The film doesn't understand the weight of its own story, which makes sense when you take a step back and realize they don't even know what they're doing to begin with. It somehow fails to be a realist film and an escapist film at the same time. Literally, the only way I can say this was successful is if they were going for the high school student film look, I guess. Approaching any project from an authentic angle really matters. It's the difference between immersion and separation. Because as always, the magic is in the details, but only if they're tied together with a unified point of aesthetic unity. And even through all of its marketing campaigns and fancy nominations, this film was doomed to fail from its conception.